director of the film, I'm Not Alone, Garin Hovhannisyan, is with us. Garin, thank you so much. And first of all, let me congratulate you on this remarkable portrait of your protagonist, Nicole, but Armenia as well. So what was the reason for you to pick up your camera that day and start from the very beginning to shoot Nicole's walk?
Well, thank you for your kind invitation. It's a pleasure for me to share this story with you and your audiences. The truth is, I had been picking up my camera and filming revolutionary activity or protests in Armenia for more than 10 years. Ever since Armenia became independent from the Soviet Union in 1991, very soon after independence, as was the fate in many post-Soviet countries, the old kind of Soviet symptoms began to reappear, and we began to see in Armenia a new brand of authoritarian rulers that had to be overthrown. And so for many years, the Armenian people were struggling to overthrow these rulers. They failed. They inevitably failed. There were peaceful protests, there were violent uprisings, and each time I would film, and each time they would fail. And so when a man named Nikol Pashinyan began to walk with a kind of ridiculous premise that he was going to overthrow the all-powerful regime, I had no reason to believe that this was going to be different or that I was making an epic film. I just picked up my camera as I always had done and began to film.
Mm-hmm. But at what point did you think, okay, something is really going to happen here?
You know, it's fascinating because there seems to be a bit of magic at work. The low point of the movement and the highest point of the movement were only about half an hour apart. You know, the day had come when the incumbent ruler, the Prime Minister Serge Sarkisian, actually took his oath of office. Nikol Pashinyan had failed to stop the rule of Serge Sarkisian. There were only just a few hundred people on the street. He'd failed to surround parliament a couple of weeks into the movement. And literally, by his own definition, the movement had failed. Serge Sarkisian had been elected, and there were very, very few people on the street. And yet just then, to the surprise of all of his followers, Nikol Pashinyan went on Facebook Live and invited the people of Armenia to the largest square in Armenia, Republic Square. And this is a square you don't invite people to because it's such a huge square. And if only a couple thousand people show up, it's going to look very empty. But this major risk was taken. And seemingly out of nowhere, for no scientific reason whatsoever, except the strange way in which the human spirit sometimes seems to work, tens of thousands of people showed up in this square within just an hour of the movement being at its low point. And so that was the moment where I think I felt, and many people felt, that a switch had been made, that a movement had kind of snapped into place.
How you managed to get an interview with the Prime Minister and the Chief of the Police? What's very interesting to me is they weren't hostile to you.
No, and I wasn't hostile to them. And it did require a lot of time, a lot of persistence on my part, and a lot of explaining. You know, they clearly knew what side of history I was on. I wasn't, you know, trying to hide that, you know, I've spent my life on the revolutionary side of things in Armenia. At the same time, I'm a journalist and I'm a historian, and I'm also, you know, interested in drama, right? And so from the perspective of all of these things, there seems to be no reason. In fact, there's an imperative to include both sides to any story, and I think that was very important. Also, you know, even in the craze and the exhilaration and the inspiration of the revolution, you always need to have kind of a detachment from this as an artist or as a journalist or as a historian. You have to look at the film you're making from 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 years from the future. And I certainly didn't want to make a film that was one-sided and that I wouldn't be proud of. You kind of have to predict the complexity of changes that may have to happen after the film. And so, yeah, it was very important to us to make a film that was complete, that included all views. And I think the sincerity of my explanation to the prime minister and to the chief of police ultimately got them to sit down. And I do think they made the right decision. I think if they weren't in the film, you would have the impression that they were far more villainous and evil than now that you have the chance to actually encounter them and to hear them.
And for the end of this conversation, I want to ask you about the process of filming. I watched the film several times, and each time I thought it looked like it was filmed with, I don't know, 20 cameras. You were everywhere. How did you manage to do that?
Well, that's kind of you to have watched the film several times. We did have several cameras in on the action. I had a camera on my own. We also made use of cameras, of cell phone footage, of footage that was taken by other people. When we had gaps in our footage, they were kind enough to lend and license their footage to us. But for the most part, it is our footage, and a lot of it comes from my own hand. Yeah, I don't know what to say. We were everywhere. This wasn't just a film being made. This was kind of an obsession. It was kind of a taking part in what seemed to be an increasingly important drama in Armenia's democracy, and we spared no effort in being everywhere and in doing everything to capture what ended up being something quite miraculous.
Thank you so much, Garin.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Director of the film I'm Not Alone, was our guest.